Welcome, YouTubers. This is the end of the fourth session, effectively. We're coming up on All-Star Week here, so I'm just going to cap it out. And as the numbers turned out, I think I'll pick up Friday on my fifth session. But when we left you out here, let's move this little arrow around here. This is where we left out. My frozen picks were at 65%. They'd been frozen most of that third session. And the overall picks had gone on this drastic downward spiral and ended up negative. And here's my goal, which was at, 10, 20, 30%. And so for the fourth session, I was trying to make 40%. Well, I was up over 40% already. So I said if I made it over 70, which is just a small jump, that I would freeze, like a 5% jump. I'd freeze the session. And that's what happened in the first day. Basically, I got up just over that 70%. And so I've been frozen for 3 weeks now, and I'll be frozen for another week with this All-Star break, but 70% on the year. So I've basically made my season goal over 7 sessions, 10% a session. I've made it in 4 sessions. But I'll continue to try to play around with this and see if I can get another 10 or 20 or 30% out of that. The overall picks, if you played every day and you played every pick that Libby put out there, she came up, she came down, up and down, up and down. Eventually she peaked at 7%. But remember, you started negative, so maybe that's 17% or whatever. And then she's gone back down. So not very positive results overall, negative for the session. So that's why it's important to freeze out. But remember, this is picking both sides, which is not something I do in the real world. Or at least I don't follow that session. And that's where if you have that opportunity, you play head-to-head, you play both sides. And that hasn't been working out real well this season at all. But let's get into that. Let's go ahead and flip over to PowerPoint here. Just I've done the numbers on each session, so this will vary a little bit different than that graph because it's slightly different numbers off my real world, but that's okay. I froze out. These are my freeze sessions, and what you would have made if you froze with me, I made 17% that session, 22% that session, 29% that session, and this last session, like I said, was just 1150. And so the overall freeze, this is sort of the one-sided freeze and not the two-sided like you saw on the graph. So it's up a little bit higher because that two-sided has been dragging stuff down. So it would have been 75% instead of the 70% we're talking about. You would have been up $15,000 over the session. That's pretty realistic to follow my advice and get there. These yellow rows are only picking one side, so you don't pick both sides, or you don't play the games where both sides pick. So again, that varies from what Libby's picks would have been, or both-sided picks, which you saw in the graph. And so here was the negative, the most negative you hit in that session. And here's where the maximum was. So if you timed it right, you could have jumped out at 45% versus like 17, or 77% versus 22. 29% was the high, so I timed that pretty good. And this one here went up to 22%, and of course I artificially capped it at 5. I just wanted to get over 70% on the other graph. Huge negatives again this session for the end amount. Not huge, but I mean negatives. So session 3 and session 4 were negative, whereas session 1 and session 2 were very positive. If you followed every single pick and you played it out, you'd be plus 10,000 or plus 50%. So it's been better to freeze, and I usually find that to be the case because you're cutting yourself off, much like going to a blackjack table and cutting yourself off. You're gonna be a winner as long as you get up, and most of the times I get up here, so it is what it is. But the both sides, and again, these numbers differ a little bit from the graph too, and I just have to reconcile that. But this session, the minimum wasn't quite as nasty. This was a huge nasty minimum. That's basically what's driving that other chart way the heck down. You can see if you only played one side, it was only half of that, right, as a overall negative. And it was minus 7,700 versus minus 2,000. So it makes a big difference on the bottom line, playing both sides of the bet. But that's the way I calculate stuff, or that's the way I give out picks, because it's just easier for me to calculate it because I'm on a team-by-team basis. I don't really follow the schedule. Figure out how a team's doing, and if two hot teams clash, that happens, right? Both sides max. Again, if you timed it right, you would have been plus 25,000. So not as high as the 33. I don't know why I didn't put percentages on that, but that's going to be, take that divided by 2, so over 100%, right? So even if you're following both sides and you got out at maximums, but most of the time you can't time it that right. It's like timing stocks, right? And the ending ended up being almost a net wash. Again, this was a huge negative. We had another negative, and we ended up plus 128 or plus 0%. So much better to be here if you're playing every single game. Don't play both sides. But even here is better. That's where we are. So yeah, good session. Again, this is the All-Star week, and I'll pick it up at the end of the week with session 5, and I'll try to get 5-10%. I'll see if how ornery I feel, because Libby's been a little bit on a downward spiral, but I'm waiting for her to spike. Just wait for her to spike. All right. See ya.